Before we dive into this wild ride, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? Whether it's a sunny beach town in Florida, a bustling high-rise in Chicago, or a snowy mountain lodge in Colorado, I love hearing just how far these Karen tales of chaos and karma can travel. The metallic clang jolted me upright before I could even register the sound. It wasn't the kind of noise you dismiss as a falling branch or a neighbor's trash lid. It was deliberate, sharp, and far too close. I pushed aside the curtain in my living room, and my stomach tightened. Under the fading amber light of the setting sun, Samantha was standing in my front yard, her blonde hair catching the glow like a halo that didn't match the fury twisting her face. In her hands was a metal pole, the tip still vibrating from the swing she had just taken. My security camera, mounted neatly on the side of the garage, was now a fractured mess, sparks flickering from the exposed wires before dying into silence. For a moment, I didn't move. My mind took a quick snapshot. The denim jacket she wore, scuffed at the elbows, the white t-shirt underneath, her black jeans creased at the knees from bending, and her stance, wide, defiant, like she was daring me to stop her. I stepped outside, the cool evening air rushing into my lungs as my bare feet hit the porch. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" My voice came out sharper than intended, the kind that cuts through background noise. Her grip tightened on the pole. She didn't flinch, didn't back away. "Protecting my privacy," she said, her tone as flat as it was venomous. "You've been watching me, day and night. I'm not stupid." I glanced at the shattered remains of the camera. It had been angled toward my driveway, the same as the other two cameras, never toward her property. "That's my driveway, Samantha. I'm not watching you. I'm protecting my home." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Sure, that's what all the creeps say." And just like that, she turned, the pole still in her hand, and walked briskly back across the strip of grass that separated our yards. The metal clinked against her leg as she disappeared behind her white picket fence. I stood there a moment longer, my jaw tight. Samantha had only been my neighbor for 6 months, but in that short time she'd managed to complain about everything. From the color I painted my shutters to how early I mowed the lawn on Saturdays. But this was different. When I moved in 3 years ago, the neighborhood had been a quiet, almost idyllic pocket of suburban order. I'd worked hard to make the place mine, fixed the porch steps, repainted the siding, landscaped the yard. The cameras had been a later addition, after a rash of package thefts hit our block. One of my cameras had even caught the culprit, a scrawny teenager in a hoodie, leading to an arrest. The neighbors had thanked me, all except Samantha. From the day she arrived, she'd eyed the cameras like they were a personal offense. I'd catch her pausing in her driveway, staring at them, lips pressed into a thin line. I brushed it off at first. People could be quirky. But then came the snide remarks, the insinuations that only people with something to hide needed cameras. I turned back inside, grabbed my phone, and began scrolling through the footage from the past hour. There she was, marching across my lawn, jaw set, pole in hand. No hesitation, no glance toward my door to see if I was watching. The swing was purposeful, the hit clean. She'd known exactly what she was doing. I saved the clip immediately, backing it up to the cloud and my external hard drive. 10 minutes later, my doorbell rang. 2 uniformed officers stood on my porch. One was tall, early 40s, with lines around his eyes from years of squinting in the sun. The other was younger, barely 30, scanning the yard as if he expected trouble. "Evening," the older one said. "We got a call from your neighbor about a possible stalking situation." I exhaled slowly. "Let me guess, Samantha?" The younger officer glanced toward her house. "That's the name she gave." I invited them in and set my laptop on the kitchen counter. "You might want to see this before you make up your mind." They watched silently as the footage played, the pole arcing through the air, the camera shattering. The older officer's brow furrowed. "She said your cameras are pointed into her windows," the younger one said, still looking at the screen. "Those cameras cover my driveway, my front yard, and the street. Nothing else. You can see it right here." I toggled through different camera feeds, each one clearly showing only my property. The older officer nodded. All right, this is pretty clear. He shut the laptop. We'll have a word with her, but you should know, these things can escalate. Keep your footage. If it happens again, call us immediately. I watched from the window as they crossed over to her house. She opened the door quickly, all false sweetness at first. Then, when they pointed toward my property, her voice rose. I couldn't hear every word, but the tone was unmistakable. Accusation, indignation. She gestured wildly toward my cameras, shaking her head. After a few minutes, the officers left. She lingered on her porch, glaring at my house, her lips moving in a silent promise. This isn't over. That night, I reviewed the footage again, this time watching the moments before the attack. She hadn't just wandered over impulsively. She'd stood on her porch for a full minute, staring at the camera, before walking over with that pole. That meant intent. I clipped that portion, labeled it, and filed it away. The next morning, I noticed something odd. My trash bins, neatly lined at the curb the night before, were tipped over, contents scattered across the driveway. It could have been raccoons, but the lid on one was still closed. I had a suspicion, but no proof. 3 days passed quietly, until I pulled into my driveway after work and saw it. The second camera, the one mounted by the garage, hung at an awkward angle, the lens cracked. My stomach sank. She'd done it again. This time, she left a note. A sheet of paper was taped to my front door, the words scrawled in thick black marker. Stop watching me, pervert. The letters bled slightly where the marker had pressed too hard, the strokes angry and uneven. I crumpled it in my fist and walked straight to her door. She answered with a smirk that made my blood pressure spike. You think this is funny? I held up the note, shaking it once. Her eyes glinted. I think it's necessary. You've destroyed my property twice now. That's a crime. She laughed, the sound brittle. You think anyone's going to believe you over me? Keep pointing those cameras at my house, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of creep you are. Her voice was loud enough to draw attention. Across the street, Mrs. Lang, the retired teacher, peeked over her garden fence. Samantha's tone was perfectly calibrated. She wanted an audience. I stepped back before I said something I'd regret. You've gone too far, Samantha. Not far enough, she called after me. Over the next week, the tension grew thick enough to taste. When I stepped outside, she was often there, loitering near the property line, her dog's leash slack in her hand as she stared at my house. Other times I'd hear the low rumble of her voice when I passed by her driveway, a quiet commentary meant just loud enough for me to catch words like pervert and watcher. Neighbors started acting differently. Some avoided eye contact, others gave awkward half-smiles. Rumors travel fast in neighborhoods like ours, especially when someone feeds them. By the end of the week, I'd had enough. I went to check the garage feed one morning only to see static. A few swipes on my phone confirmed it. The third camera had gone offline. I walked outside and found the reason. The housing was cracked open, dangling by a single screw. My hands curled into fists. This wasn't paranoia. It wasn't overreaction. She was actively trying to strip away the one layer of security I had put in place. I took a deep breath, forcing my pulse to slow. I needed a plan, not another argument. But for now, I tightened the screws on the housing, knowing it was already useless. The street was quiet when I returned inside, but I knew better. Somewhere, behind that pristine white fence, she was probably smiling. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I'd already saved everything. Every swing of the pole, every shouted insult, every glare caught on camera. It was all there, waiting. And the next time she stepped onto my property, it wouldn't just be my word against hers. It would be proof. And that proof was going to change everything. The next morning, the air was heavy with the kind of stillness that makes you think a storm's coming. Clouds hung low, muting the sunlight, and every sound seemed sharper against the quiet. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee cooling in my hands, staring at the feed from my remaining cameras. 2 were still operational, but the coverage was weak. Angles didn't catch the side gate, and the blind spot near the garage was exactly where she'd struck before. It wasn't just about security anymore. It was about control. Samantha had made it clear she didn't want me feeling safe on my own property. Every time she smashed a camera, she wasn't just breaking plastic and wires. She was sending a message. And judging by the way neighbors had started whispering, she was hoping to break my credibility too. By mid-afternoon, that storm in the air had turned into a storm in my head. I drove to the hardware store and bought 2 new cameras, high-mounted models with reinforced casings. The kind you couldn't reach without a ladder. When I returned home, I didn't bother hiding what I was doing. I drilled into the siding while she stood in her driveway, arms crossed, eyes locked on me. "You're really pushing your luck," she called out, her voice carrying just enough to make the comment seem casual but loaded. I didn't answer. The camera swiveled into place, the lens catching the faint reflection of her standing there, a shadow against the pale sky. That night, as I reviewed the live feeds, I caught her pacing near the property line. Not close enough to trespass, but close enough to make sure I knew she was there. She kept glancing upward, as if measuring the distance to the new cameras, her lips pressed so tightly together it looked painful. 2 days later, the HOA sent me an email. A formal complaint had been filed against me, anonymous, of course, though the tone was unmistakable. Creating a hostile environment through invasive surveillance, it read. There was a meeting scheduled for the end of the week. I knew how those meetings worked. You could walk in with the truth in one hand and proof in the other, and still lose if the board decided you were disrupting the neighborhood. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early, laptop under my arm. The room smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner, the long table in the center surrounded by folding chairs. A few neighbors sat already, some making polite nods, others avoiding my eyes. Samantha walked in a few minutes later, wearing a floral blouse that seemed intentionally chosen to soften her appearance. She gave the room a wide, sheepish smile, as if she were the victim here, and slid into a seat directly across from me. The HOA president, a balding man named Curtis, cleared his throat. "We're here to address concerns regarding property surveillance and privacy complaints." I didn't wait for her to start spinning her story. "I have footage of my neighbor repeatedly trespassing and destroying my cameras. I've filed no complaints about her, but she's filed false accusations against me." Her head snapped toward me. "False? You've been filming my home." I opened the laptop, clicking through to a paused frame. Samantha, in full view, swinging the metal pole. A murmur ran through the room. "This," I said evenly, "is my driveway, not her home, and she's on my property." Curtis shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't the place to resolve criminal matters." "But Mr. Hale," he looked at me, "perhaps you could reduce the number of cameras to ease tensions." I leaned back, realizing this was exactly how she operated. Apply enough pressure through public opinion, make me look unreasonable, then force me to back down. I closed the laptop slowly, meeting her gaze. "I'll think about it." The smirk that tugged at her mouth told me she thought she'd won something. She was wrong. That night, I sat at my desk and began mapping out a plan. The visible cameras were too easy for her to target. I needed decoys, cheap, obvious, and expendable. The real cameras would be tucked into places she wouldn't think to look. Under the eaves, behind tinted covers, integrated into a motion sensor light fixture. By the next morning, the first dummy camera was in place, angled just enough toward the side yard to draw her attention. The real one, hidden inside the birdhouse on my porch, had a perfect, unobstructed view of it. I didn't have to wait long. On the third evening, I heard the faint scrape of shoes on gravel. Pulling up the live feed, I saw her creeping toward the decoy camera, broom handle in hand. She glanced over her shoulder twice, then swung upward. The broom cracked against the housing, sending the cheap plastic cover spinning into the grass. I muted the mic so she wouldn't hear me laughing. The birdhouse camera caught every second. Her face, the swing, the muttered insult. "That'll teach you, creep." After she left, I retrieved the decoy from the ground. It was worthless as a camera, but priceless as bait. I set it back up the following day, almost daring her to try again. Over the next week, she did. Twice. Each time, the hidden cameras caught her from multiple angles. One inside the garage even picked up her voice clearly enough to make out every word. She wasn't just vandalizing. She was admitting motive. Still, I didn't call the police yet. I wanted her comfortable enough to keep going, to dig herself deeper. The longer I waited, the more reckless she became. She started coming closer to the house, sometimes stepping onto the porch to tap on the window, and then run back across the lawn. The real breakthrough came when I left a cardboard box marked fragile equipment in plain sight near the decoy camera. She appeared just after dusk, crouching beside the box, her fingers curling under the flap before she thought better of it. She looked up at the decoy, smirked, and took one last satisfying swing with the broom. What she didn't know was that 2 hidden cameras were aimed directly at her from different sides. One caught her expression in crisp detail. The other caught her foot crossing the property line and staying there for nearly 3 minutes. When I watched the footage later that night, I realized I had more than enough to press charges. But I wanted one more thing, one clear, undeniable sequence where she destroyed property, trespassed, and verbally tied herself to the act all at once. Something no one, not the police, not the HOA, not even the most gullible neighbor, could dismiss. I got it 2 nights later. The feed lit up with motion alerts, and there she was, moving toward the porch. This time, she had the metal pole again. She jabbed it at the decoy until it clattered to the ground, then stepped forward, close enough to the doorbell camera to trigger the chime inside. She leaned in, her breath visible in the cool night air, and hissed, "Stop watching me, or I'll make sure you regret it." She turned sharply and walked back to her house, the pole swinging casually in her grip. I sat back, adrenaline humming under my skin. That was it. That was the moment. I compiled the footage into a single file, time-stamped, unedited, crystal clear. Then I backed it up on 3 drives and sent one copy to a neighbor I trusted, just in case she somehow got to my equipment. The next morning, as I carried my coffee to the porch, I caught her watching me from her yard. There was no pretense anymore, no attempt at civility. Her stare was cold, almost daring. She didn't know it yet, but she'd already lost. And by the time she realized, it would be far too late to undo what she'd done. The morning I decided to end it, the air had a brittle edge, the kind that makes every sound feel sharper. The neighborhood was quiet, the usual chorus of dogs and leaf blowers replaced by an odd stillness. I sat in my living room, the laptop open before me, each clip lined up in a neat row like ammunition. The evidence was complete, every trespass, every swing, every threat, captured in high resolution and stamped with dates and times. By the time I called the police, my voice was steady. I told them I had ongoing harassment and destruction of property, with video proof for each incident. They promised to send a unit immediately. I didn't pace. I didn't fidget. I just sat watching the live feed from the front camera, the one that now stared unblinking across the yard. 15 minutes later, the patrol car rolled up, blue and red lights flashing silently. 2 officers stepped out. One I recognized from the first incident, the older man with the sun-squint lines around his eyes, and a younger woman I hadn't met before. They greeted me briskly, then asked to see the footage. I led them to the kitchen, where the laptop was waiting. I clicked play on the compilation, each clip flowing into the next. Samantha crossing onto my property, smashing cameras, muttering insults, threatening me directly. Her voice was clear, her face unmistakable. The officers didn't interrupt, though the younger one's eyebrows rose slightly at the last clip, where Samantha leaned into the doorbell camera and hissed her final warning. When the video ended, the older officer exhaled through his nose. "That's pretty definitive." He glanced at his partner, who nodded. "We'll speak to her now." I followed them outside, stopping at the edge of my porch. Samantha's door opened before they even reached it, as if she'd been waiting. She stepped out, feigning surprise at the sight of the patrol car. "Officers," she said sweetly, "I'm so glad you're here." "He's been." The older officer cut her off. "Ma'am, we've reviewed video evidence of you trespassing and damaging your neighbor's property on multiple occasions. We need to talk to you about that." Her smile faltered, replaced by confusion, then disbelief. "Video? No, he's making that up. He edits things to make me look." The younger officer stepped forward. "The videos are time-stamped and unedited. They show you clearly on his property. This isn't a misunderstanding, ma'am." Her eyes flicked to me, full of venom. You set me up. I met her stare evenly. No. You set yourself up. I just pressed record. The older officer informed her she was being cited for destruction of property and harassment, and that she might face additional charges. The moment the words "you're under arrest" left his mouth, her composure cracked. She sputtered, half protests, half pleas, but the cuffs clicked shut with a finality that seemed to drain the fight from her. Neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the flashing lights. Mrs. Lang watched from her porch, lips pursed. A man from down the street pulled out his phone, angling it discreetly to capture Samantha being led to the patrol car. The whispers started almost immediately, little ripples of surprise and speculation spreading through the quiet evening air. As they guided her into the back seat, she twisted around to glare at me one last time. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear, but I didn't need to. The look said it all: rage, humiliation, and the slow dawning realization that she had no one to blame but herself. The car pulled away, leaving behind the smell of exhaust and the low hum of neighbors talking in hushed tones. The street felt different now, as if some pressure had finally been released. Still, I knew this wasn't quite over. Arrests came with processes, and processes could drag. Over the next few days, the neighborhood's mood shifted. People who had avoided me before now nodded or even stopped to chat. Word had gotten around about the videos, the arrest, the truth behind the rumors she'd been spreading. The HOA dropped the complaint against me without comment. Samantha's house stayed dark for a week. Then, one afternoon, I saw a man I didn't recognize carrying boxes from her garage to a rental truck. Whether she was moving by choice or by consequence, I didn't know. But the sight of that truck in her driveway felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in months. I replaced the broken cameras with newer models, smaller, tougher, with sharper resolution. The decoys went into a box in the garage, their purpose served. For the first time in a long while, the feed showed nothing but the ordinary rhythm of life. Kids riding bikes, delivery trucks rumbling past, the wind moving through the trees. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I stood on the porch adjusting the angle of the new front camera. The street was quiet, the air cooling. I looked into the lens and, with a faint smile, said, "Smile for the camera, Sam." Oh wait, you can't anymore. Inside, the soft red blink of the recording light reflected off the glass, a small, steady pulse that promised no one would get away with crossing that line again. But as I shut the door and glanced once more at the empty street, a thought lingered at the back of my mind. People like Samantha didn't change. They just found new places to start over. Somewhere, maybe not far from here, she'd be telling her story again, spinning herself as the victim, looking for the next neighbor to turn into an enemy. And if she found one, I only hoped they'd be ready to hit record.